Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Brinkley Brown, and I'm a member of the JFK Junior Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, note the exit doors, which are located directly behind you on the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please walk to the exit and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag #JarrettForum, which is also listed in your program. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guest, former senior advisor to President Barack Obama, Valerie Jarrett, and tonight's moderator, IOP resident fellow, Yohannes Abraham.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. A little hello back.
I don't know why I took the long way around the... Is this on? So I couldn't be more excited. Folks who may know me, I have a couple friends in the back know that I've been sort of very excited to have Valerie here for some time. I think everyone is here because you are familiar with Valerie's background. She has carried a lot of titles over the years. She's been a CEO. She has been a member of many boards, both public and private. She's currently a member of the board of directors of both Lyft and Ariel Capital Management. She's been a city commissioner for one of our great cities, the city of Chicago. She's been senior advisor to President Obama. She's been the head of the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs during the Obama administration. She was the chair of the White House Council on Women and Girls. I would probably venture a guess that her favorite title is that of mother of the fantastic Laura Jarrett, a good friend of mine, who is a reporter at CNN. And but for me personally, I'm just really grateful. You've been a phenomenal friend and mentor, so thank you for being here.
Thank you, Yohannes. Yohannes was my chief of staff in the White House, so I'm watching him carefully. Once a chief of staff, always a chief of staff.
Yes. I've had many fantastic bosses, but Valerie's my lifetime boss. I sort of consider her my perma boss.
I will haunt you forever.
Yes.
Just remember that when you're about to do something you know you shouldn't do. That rarely happens. It's good to be here, in all seriousness. I did this once before. I think it was in 2010. So you all were mostly not here. Some of you might have still been here, but you were all somewhere else, much younger, and it was a pleasure. So it's always good to be back.
So why don't we jump into it? I have a couple questions.
First, you were going to mention we have some company here.
Oh, yes. I told you, she's my permanent boss. We are very lucky. It was fun backstage. It was sort of a Obama administration reunion. We're very lucky to have some of our former colleagues in the audience, including members of President Obama's cabinet. We were just hanging out with Secretary Ash Carter, who's obviously here. We have Secretary Sally Jewell, who I believe is also in the audience, former Secretary of the Interior. We have former SBA Administrator Karen Mills is also here, and then I believe he had to duck out, but Jason Furman, who's a professor, but before that, a professor at the Kennedy School before that, was the chair of our Council of Economic Advisors, is also here along with a few of our other colleagues. So let's give them a round of applause before we...
We come with our peeps.
Yes, we roll deep.
We roll deep.
So my first question is, thinking back to putting yourself back in 2008 and early 2009, you were running the Habitat company, you were a CEO, you had a great life, you had a beautiful office. You could have stayed there and stayed in business. Alternatively, you could have very easily been an elected official from the state of Illinois. You could
not so easily.
You could have been. You could have been. There was talk of you becoming the senator from Illinois when the president ascended into office. There are some out there that had talked about you and still talk about you as a possible mayor of Chicago.
You starting trouble here?
A little bit. And the my question is, when President Obama asked you to come to the White House to uproot from Chicago, I'd just love to get a sense of what your thought process was and what you were thinking.
Well, so let's go back to the fact that the Obamas have been dear personal friends of mine for 26 years now. So before some of you were born, which is rather stunning. I was a toddler when we met. Yeah, please laugh. That's supposed to be funny. This wasn't as funny as it should have been. But before they were married, before they had children, when my daughter was 5, she's now in her 30s. And so our lives have intersected over 26 years. And so we are and have always been very close. I recruited Michelle then Robinson to come and work for me when I worked for Mayor Daley in the mayor's office. I worked on every campaign President Obama ever had, and I was a senior advisor to his 2008 campaign. And increasingly, as we got towards the end, I spent more and more time on the campaign trail. And there was a day where he said to me, if this works out, you have to come. And I kind of knew that day was coming and that conversation was coming. And I did say to him, well, what about if I go to Washington, but I'm taking your Senate seat instead? And he kind of humored me with that for a little while. His wife, not so much. She's like, no, that's not a good idea. You should come to be with us. And then finally, I said to him, well, what seriously would you want me to do? And when he described the portfolio that he was going to give me, Intergovernmental Affairs, which allowed me to continue to work with our nation's mayors and governors, something I had done in Chicago and in Illinois, and public engagement, which I have done in every public position I've ever had, and also in my private job at the Habitat Company. And then senior advisor, which is whatever he wants it to be, and to be there in the White House at this a part of a historic presidency and working for someone who's one of my dearest friends, it was really an offer I couldn't refuse. Although I did pause and I said, well, I've been kind of like the boss of you since I've known you, since I was older and a mentor. And I said, so does this mean you'd be the boss of me? And he said, yes. And I said, well, that's a role change. And he said, but I would be the president of the United States. I said, okay, good point. So I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek. The thought of working for someone I respect so much in the White House was an opportunity of a lifetime, and I was old enough to appreciate it. I often said to some of my younger colleagues, I just wish you were older so you would recognize what an extraordinary moment this is that we have the privilege to serve, and enjoy it every day. I started January 20th, 2009, and I literally turned out the lights at about a minute to 12 this year.
One thing I've reflected a lot on since we got out were the first couple days in office and how crazy they were, with the economy in the state that it was and the fact that the president had to manage 2 wars. I'd love just a sense of how you attacked that first month or 2 months and what it felt like, and sort of a feel for what those early days are like.
Well, it's all just kind of a blank now because it was truly drinking out of a water hose. Just think about it. When the September before President Obama was elected is when the financial crisis really began to melt down with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, one of the larger Wall Street players. And then that started a cascade. And we didn't really know where it was going to end. And I remember during the transition listening to many of the president's economic advisors, including Jason, who said this could be really, really horrendous. We don't know what's going to happen. Millions of people had already lost their jobs when President Obama took office. We were losing about 750 to 800,000 jobs a month. Millions of people had lost their homes. The automobile industry was on the verge of bankruptcy. 2 wars, energy crisis, our dependence on foreign oil was both a drain financially and also a national security issue. We had a lot going on. And you don't have the luxury of doing them sequentially, just like you got 10 classes all at one time, and you have to just move everything down the road. And I think we used our transition time very prudently, and I think we differed with President Bush over a lot of policy issues, but every chance I get, I talk about how incredible his team was during the transition of power. And it is one of the strengths of a democracy is you can have a knockdown, drag-out fight during a political campaign, but then you really must, for the good of the country, have a smooth transition. And his team and he were incredible, and that allowed us to really hit the ground running. But I still remember while the inaugural parade was going on, it was cold outside, and I'm from Chicago, and I do not like the cold. And so I thought, well, I'll skip the parade, I'll go inside and I'll try to figure out where everything is. And it is truly a startup company. You go in there and, at the beginning, and I was one of the co-chairs of the transition, when we started that process, we had only person who was a certain employee was the President of the United States. Everybody else had to be onboarded, and you had to go through, and my goodness, I had never done something like that before. So it was invigorating, it was terrifying. We used to scare each other by saying, well, what if we don't stabilize the financial markets? What's actually going to happen, not just to our country, but to the global markets? And I've never seen so many people work so hard under such extraordinarily challenging circumstances to really pull us back from the brink of what could have been the next Great Depression. So it was an exciting time, but it stayed exciting. Every chapter had posed its own unique set of challenges and opportunities, but the beginning was really terrifying.
Speaking of terrifying, there was a brief moment in time where the only phone number that the United States Congress had for the Obama White House was my desk line. There was about 3 days where the only phone number that every House office had to reach the Obama White House was my desk. So I sort of, those were a dark couple days for me.
I bet. I bet they were. Did you have your number changed?
Yes. Yes. Have you guys seen that I Love Lucy episode where they're stuffing chocolates into their shirt because they can't keep it? That was basically me for the first week of the administration. Did you have any sort of pinch me moments?
Every single day. Every single day. The first time I walked into the Oval Office, I caught my breath, and I'd been on a tour. How many of you toured the White House? Like your 8th grade tour, right? So I'd been there to the perimeter, but I'd never actually been in the room. But when you walk in the room and if you look up, it's the most incredible ceiling. It's just beautiful. And the acoustics in the room are similar to having a microphone, and so even whispering, you can hear your voice all over the room. It's kind of creepy, so you can't whisper about anybody because they're listening to everything you're saying. And I remember at the end of the first week, President Obama, my office was on the 2nd floor, and he decided to take a walk around, and so he showed up at my doorstep, and Tina Chin, who ran public engagement and had known him forever, and my assistant Kathy Branch, who had known him forever, were milling around, and he walked in, and it was a little startling. It's what's the president doing, wandering around? Well, he can wander wherever he wants to, right? And so he said to Tina and to Kathy, have you seen the Oval Office yet? And they said no. And so all 3 of us went back down to the Oval just as Mrs. Obama walked in. And if you could imagine all these folks who've known each other 20 plus years sitting on the couches, and we were just like, well, how did this happen? What are we doing here? That was a pinch me moment I'll never forget. And the way that they just embraced us all and tried to buck everybody up during some really tough times and be a family at the same time as we were trying to do the people's business. So every day when I drove through the gates, I thought to myself, I cannot believe that I have this privilege.
Now, you wore many hats in the White House. There were sort of 3 primary ones. You were the head of the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and Public Engagement, as we've discussed. You were as chair of the White House Council on Women and Girls, and you were a senior advisor to the president. So for folks who are not familiar with White House structure, she was one of the small handful of most senior counselors to the president, and reported directly to him throughout the course of, was the longest serving senior advisor. I'd love to get a sense of how you saw that last role as an advisor to the president, how you conceptualized it and sort of wrapped your mind around that duty.
Well, there were 3 senior advisors, and we all had different responsibilities, and then the chief of staff. And so that was his senior team. And it was our charge to make sure that whatever went into him had been thoroughly vetted, had been examined, had been analyzed. Our goal was to really reach out throughout both the White House and our agencies and make sure that we were presenting information to him in a digestible way so that he could make decisions. And we spent a lot of time together, as you know. We started every morning. In the very beginning, we started at 7:30. With each couple of years, we moved it a little bit further, in large part because a lot of us, not me, but a lot of us had children. And as the children were being born and being more demanding in the morning, because we tried to be family friendly, I think in the end we were starting around 8:15 or 8:30 even. Makes a big difference when you have young children, have that extra hour. But we spent quality time together, and our job was to really ensure that whatever went to him was ready for him. And our goal was always to try to reach consensus. If we didn't reach consensus, we would prepare a memo for him outlining Valerie thinks this and Pete thinks that and Dennis thinks that, and then send it to him ahead of time, and then he would decide, did he just want to make a decision or did he want to bring us all in? And more times than not, he would bring us all in, together with the people who were policy folks who also would come in and debate issues. And he is the kind of a leader that's both intellectually curious, which means you have to listen, and you have to be willing to engage and prod. And I think it comes from having been a great professor. He just loves that conversation to make sure that when he's making decisions, he's thought them through. And we used to joke with him because we would come in only with like really tough decisions, and he would go, "Where are the easy ones?" And we go, "Oh no, we made those. We took care of all those easy ones. You just get the tough ones." But our job was really just to make sure everything that went to him was tight, and that the most precious thing he had was time. And it was our job to manage his time as efficiently and as effectively as possible, and keep the trains running on time.
Speaking of hard decisions,
Yes.
what was the hardest decision you saw him have to wrestle with that you're allowed to talk about here?
I was going to say, if I tell you, you know what happens.
Yep.
You know what happens
Yes.
next. I still got ash here somewhere. No, just kidding. Really just kidding. No, so I think, and Ash will appreciate this, that the toughest decisions he made were the ones where he put our men and women in harm's way. And I remember, keep in mind, he ran on a campaign really against the Iraqi war for sure, and his goal has always been to use diplomacy wherever possible. Yes, we have the strongest military in the world, and it's important to have and maintain it and nurture it, but it's also important to not shy away from diplomatic relationships. And it was somewhat controversial in the first campaign where he said, "Yeah, I will talk with anybody if I think that will help keep America safe. Your job as commander-in-chief is to keep us safe. And oftentimes a diplomatic solution is a more effective one." And when he was deciding about whether or not he was going to add additional troops to Afghanistan, it was a hard decision for him to make. And he really pushed his advisors and the Defense Department to come up with a plan that would answer all of the questions that he had. And because it was a very thorny issue, he had a lot of questions. And it was one of these instances where the press artificially made up their mind, oh, he should make the decision this week. And when he didn't, they said, well, why hasn't he made the decision this week? Well, he never said he was going to make the decision then. He was going to make it when he was ready, because it was such an important decision. So when he did decide to add troops, he made the decision to go to West Point to announce the decision. And he thought it was really important to look right into the eyes of the people who were most in harm's way before, in order to announce it. And I went with him, and I just remember being very nervous. Being very nervous on the airplane, just trying to imagine what it would be like for him to stand in front of these young men and women who were younger than my daughter and tell them, I am making a decision that could really hurt you. And I sat in the audience, and these amazing, we are so lucky to have the caliber of people we have who are many younger than you, who have devoted themselves to doing just that, and who work hard and study and become extraordinarily proficient at what they do. And then they go every day fighting for us. And I sat and I cried looking at these kids, because they're kids. And it was so important to him to say, I respect you and I respect what you're doing for our country, and you deserve to hear from me why I'm making this decision. And he went back several years later, and 4 of the people who had been in that room when he made the decision are no longer with us. Those are the hard decisions. And Commander-in-Chief, it's a very lonely job, because ultimately, no matter what counsel you receive from your defense secretary or your other cabinet members or your senior advisors, there's only one commander-in-chief. And it's a very powerful job, and it's one that is life or death, and to be taken very seriously.
Could you talk to us a little bit about, and this could be a day or it could be a week or it could even be a stretch of time, but amongst all the memorable moments, what was the most memorable moment for you in the 8 years in the White House?
We had some moments. Some were good, some were bad, some were dark, some were ugly. And of course, now in retrospect, I cherish every single one of them. And even we were in the green room talking about the oil spill. Do any of you remember the oil spill, the Gulf oil spill? Let me just see a show of hands. Oh, thank heavens. Because it occupied my life for 3 months. And President Obama had the terrific idea that every day I should have a phone call with the 5 governors from the states who were affected. All 5 Republican governors, well, one was friendly, and he lost his election, Governor Christ. But the rest of them, they were brutal. Although I did become actually quite because when you talk to somebody every single day, 7 days a week for 3 months, you do develop relationships. And the reason why the president, and it was absolutely the right call. He said, "This is a kind of thing where if you leave it to just 10 layers down in the bureaucracy of our teams talking to BP and talking to all of the other players, it just might never get solved quickly enough." And issues were coming up every single day, and the governors like to fight over boom. Now, I didn't even know what boom was, but if you're from these states and you're used to oil, it's what the material that you put out in the water to pull oil away. And boom, we didn't have a lot of boom because no one had anything like this before, and so they were literally fighting over who gets the allocation of boom. And we thrashed those things out on those calls, and at that point, Janet Napolitano is our Homeland Security Secretary, and she came on those calls. So that was quite something, but that was not the most extraordinary. I raise it because we had a lot of these kind of big crises, and then once they're resolved, like Ebola, nobody talks about Ebola. I know Ron Klain was here talking about Ebola. Unbelievable. Without the best military in the world, who knows what might have happened. I mean, we executed that with cooperation with a bunch of international players, truly flawlessly. But that's not the story I want to tell you. Those are digressions. So I think, and I'm writing a book, so I spent a lot of time thinking about just these kinds of things. And I've never written a book before, and I'm not a person that tends to look backwards. I always look forward. So this is an uncomfortable process for me. But it has allowed me to come up with what was truly the most extraordinary day, and it was in June of 2015. The years all kind of mushed together, but I think it was 15. Yes, it was 15. And the Supreme Court, any of you lawyers? No one from the law school here? Okay, we got one lawyer. All right. So the Supreme Court tends to announce its most controversial decisions at the end of a term, and the term ends at the end of June. And so they save all the good stuff for last. But they never tell you what's coming, what day, and we make it kind of a parlor game of guessing what they're going to do. We have no inside information. We're never right, but we always guess. And so we had been caught completely by surprise when on a Thursday they announced that for the second time they had upheld the Affordable Care Act. So that was an amazing day, and it was a too close decision, and we celebrated. And so we assumed, because they had done that would mean that the next day would go dark because they still had a few more days left for controversial things. And normally when we think a decision is coming back, there's a thing called SCOTUS blog, and it's a blog site that refreshes every 2 minutes, and you can look and see what the decisions are. So when we think they're coming, we are like looking at the computer, pressing refresh. So we didn't think anything was going to happen on this Friday, and so we're all in our normal senior staff meeting, and my assistant comes in with a note, and it says, marriage equality 5-4. And I was like, and I read it like 5 times. I'm like, we won like quick, like today? And we're all jumping up, and so the chief of staff said, well, you should go tell the president. My team had worked really hard on this together with the lawyers in the White House. So I go running down the hall to the Oval Office, and I get there, and he's not there. Right? So I'm like, well, dang. All right, so I go dejected back down to Dennis's office, and Dennis said, what did he say? And I said, he wasn't there. He said, well, did you call him? I said, well, no, I didn't think about that. Yeah, I guess I could go pick up the telephone. But I'm used to not calling him during the day because he's usually in his office when we go down there. So I pick up the phone and I call him, and the operator must have said, it's Valerie on the phone, because he answers the phone and he goes, what? So I said, well, sir, the Supreme Court ruled on marriage equality today, 5-4. And then there's a long pregnant pause, and he said, and are you going to tell me who won? I said, oh, I buried the lead on that one, didn't I? I said, we did. He said, well, it's a great week. And he said, I'll be right down. Well, the reason why he was upstairs late is that he was working on his eulogy for Reverend Pinckney, because this happened on the very same day, as you'll remember, that we were going to Charleston for the memorial service for Reverend Pinckney and his parishioners who had been murdered. And I know I had been dreading it because we've just been to so many memorial services. And at first he wondered, like, what can I say after having said so much on this subject? And he came up with this incredible eulogy that really was an education about the Black church and how, yes, it's important to take down the Confederate flag, but it's also important to invest in our schools. And it's also important to make sure that our police and our communities have a bond of trust. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful speech. And so he'd been working on that upstairs. So before we left, now he has to write a speech about marriage equality. And I'm trying to get the plaintiffs on the telephone, and he's doing 2 speeches, and he goes to the Rose Garden, and he gives this incredible speech about marriage equality. And what I remember most about it is that he said, it seems like a thunderbolt unless you've been working on this for decades. And for the people who've been working on this for decades, I know this is an incredible moment. But remember, with every thunderbolt, it takes a lot of time to get to a day like that. So we get on the helicopter, and he says to the First Lady and to me, I think I might sing. So I learned my lesson, because a few years earlier when we were in New York, some of you may remember he was singing Al Green. He decided to sing Al Green, and I'd been backstage, and I said, oh, don't do that. That's not a good idea. And he goes, no, I think I want to sing. And there were the technicians who were operating the lights. They're like, sing, Mr. Obama, President Obama, sing. And I'm like, no, this is not good. Don't do it. So we went out there, and of course it was a huge smash, right? So this time when he said he was going to sing, I said, great idea. Great idea. Sing, sing. So he did, as you know, Amazing Grace. And to be there when I had really been dreading going to this funeral and trying to imagine what I would say to the families who had had this devastating thing happen in their house of worship. And the spirit in the room was incredibly uplifting and positive and forgiving, as you'd heard some of them said right after the young man was arraigned, we forgive you. And you could feel it in that room. So it was great spirit. And we met with each of the families afterwards, and they each talked about, one wanted to start a summer camp in the name of their loved one who was lost. And one of them made a T-shirt that said something like, love conquers hate. And it was just like as good as America gets, I think, that day. And then the day got amazing, because we fly back, and maybe 3 weeks earlier, one of the folks on my staff had come to me and she said, I have an idea. You're going to think it's an impossible idea. It's probably a bad idea. I don't think it'll work. It's probably just ridiculous. And I said, I really want to hear this idea. It's just kind of like my idea, right? And she said, a few of us thought, what if we win marriage equality and we light the White House in a rainbow? I'm like, that's a great idea. Let's see if it's even possible. And we found out we could do it. And so at the end of what was a very emotional day, many of the White House staff came out onto the North Portico and watched the sun go down and the colors pop up and people just streaming to the front gates of the White House to celebrate what truly was a moving of the long arc of the moral universe towards justice. So that was a spectacular day.
That absolutely was. We had some pretty long days and definitely some long nights at the White House. For some reason, I'm thinking about the government shutdown. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So just quickly,
it's not funny that you have a government shutdown. That's not why we're laughing.
It's not funny at all. It's just what happens is the White House staff shrinks down to about maybe 10% of its size, even less than 10% of its size. And so people who, you have your head of research will be sending out the daily morning clips, and everybody kind of takes on the role of the entirety of their team, and including all of the administrative tasks. And I was basically at the junior most level that was allowed to stay.
It's deemed essential.
Deemed essential. And I proved myself very quickly to be rather
essential.
Rather ineffective at a wide range of tasks that I had theretofore thought were fairly administrative and simple, and it turns out they're actually quite hard. And,
like how you get people into the White House.
Yes.
It's not so easy.
Yes.
Thankfully, it's not so easy.
Yes. But through all those ups and downs and sort of the long hours, I'd love to get a sense of what kept you going. Where'd you draw inspiration from?
Well, a lot of people who I knew had sacrificed so much in order for us to be there. I met Yohannes in Iowa. Don't worry, I'm not going too far down this path. In 2007, and he, extraordinarily well-educated, remarkable man who decided to, right after college, go to a state that he knew nothing about and live in, not the best circumstances and work 25 hours a day and just really grind it out for someone he believed in. And our campaign was full of people who were similarly committed to do just that, right? And so all of you gave me a lot of inspiration, and I think there was a dark time during the campaign where President Obama thought he actually might lose, and it was far enough along that so much was invested. And what worried him was that he was disappointing you guys. And he just thought, they've tried so hard, and this is so important to them. I want to do this for them. So that kept me going. And then there was also, I'll tell a story I love to tell about a man I met. And you meet literally thousands of people in a 2-year campaign. And why some stick out over others, it's hard to say. But we did meet a man in Austin, Texas. And it was after one of the debates in the primary, and we didn't think we would even get to Texas because everyone had told us it would be over by Super Tuesday. And Super Tuesday was February 5th, my dad's birthday. And all I know is at 2 a.m. February 6th, we had no idea who was going to win, and the campaign went on. So we're leaving Austin, Texas, and it's 7:30 in the morning. President Obama is not a morning person. I share that with you in confidence. And he had a cold, and he was just from the debate, which he never enjoyed the debates. And so he was a little grumpy. And we get into the elevator, and an elderly black gentleman clears his throat. And I thought, oh, I wouldn't strike up a conversation right now. I learned the lesson, because I'm a morning person, and he's not. And morning people need to just keep it down in the morning. I learned that. So don't be too cheerful before 8 o'clock.
And just as a quick aside, when she says she's a morning person, she has permanently rewired my sleep cycle.
Good.
Because she's a morning person, as in she's up at 4:45, 5, emailing by 5:30, emailing detailed emails by 5:45. Sorry,
It's true. But then by 10 o'clock, I'm pretty useless. Anyway, we digress. So this gentleman clears his throat and he says, "Sir, I'd like to give you something." So of course I'm nosy. I lean in to see what is it, and it's a patch from his military uniform. And so then Senator Obama recognizes what it is, and he says, "Oh, sir, I couldn't possibly accept that." And they go back and forth and back and forth, and finally the guy clears his throat again, and he said, "Sir, I've carried this patch with me every day for 40 years. It's kept me safe when I served our country. It's given me courage through some tough times. And you have a hard road ahead, and I want you to have it." Wow, of course, I burst into tears. And I don't mean like those dainty little tears. I mean like, couldn't catch my breath in this very small elevator. It was very embarrassing until I looked around, and I swear one of those Secret Service agents was tearing up too. I mean, it was just it was symbolic of what the campaign was supposed to be all about, which is the greater good. Sacrificing, as Yohannes did when he signed on for Iowa, making yourself a part of this mosaic, responsible for making our country what we want it to be. So later in the day, I said to then Senator Obama, I said, "What did you do with that patch?" And he said, "I put it in my pocket." And I thought, you know what, typical man. I didn't mean like, where did you physically put it? I mean, how did it make you feel? Because this was before people were giving their firstborn children to him, like over the mosh pit rope line. When I saw that the first time, I'm like, that's your baby. Don't hand it to 5 strangers before it gets to him. And why do you want him to hold your baby, right? This was before any of that started happening. I'm sorry if anybody passed a baby over to him. Or if any of you were passed over. Anyway, I digress again. So he answers me, and this is like classic of our relationship. He said, "Valerie, I put it in my pocket." And he proceeds to reach in his pocket, and he pulls out 10 or 12 trinkets, and he tells me the name of the person who gave it to him, where he was, what the circumstances were, and why it was so special that he keeps it in his pocket. And to this day, he keeps trinkets in his pocket from ordinary people who've touched his heart along the way. So fast forward, and I tell this story all the time because every day when I would come through the gates of the White House, I would think about him. And I didn't know his name for 4 years, but I just thought, we're in there fighting for him. And so this is never about us. This is about people like that man who made this sacrifice, and he's counting on us. And anytime I started a little like wallow in self-pity because we were working so hard, I would just think, okay, well, you know what? That patch is no longer in his possession, it's in ours. And that was a proxy for what we were to do. So a reporter from the Washington Post heard me tell this story. And as the second inauguration was coming upon us, she called me, Karen Tumultry, and she said, remember that guy that you always talk about, you know, with the military patch? And I go, yeah. She goes, I want to track him down and see what he's doing and write a story about him. Panic set in. Why? Well, what if he was an axe murderer? And I've been thinking about him every day. Every single day, I spend 20 seconds thinking about this guy. And I don't even know his name. I know nothing about him. Who knows who he could be? Well, she tracked him down. And his name is Earl Smith. And he was running security in the Hyatt Hotel in Austin, Texas. And she sent me his email. And so I was on the treadmill in Hawaii, actually with the Obamas when I received it. And I'm looking at my emails because we check our emails no matter what we're doing. And I stopped on the treadmill and I wrote, Dear Mr. Smith, my name is Valerie Jarrett. I'm the woman that burst into tears in the back of the elevator. I'm not sure if you remember me. And he said, yes, I do. And so then I told President Obama. And he said, invite him to the inauguration, the second inauguration. So we did. And the day after the second inauguration, Mr. Smith came into the Oval Office and he saluted the president. And of course, I burst into tears again. But there is a continuity of this long story because you have to remember why you're there. And one of President Obama's strengths was taking both the long view, but also never losing the focus. And there are so many people in Washington who want to do nothing more than make you lose your focus, make you forget why you're there, make you think about short-term political gains. And I will say to you unequivocally, that's not how we rolled. And people like Earl Smith helped remind us of that on the hardest days.
That's awesome. I think that's a good segue to audience.
You.
Yes, to audience questions. So I think we have some mics up there, and we also have some mics on the ground floor. And as people queue up to ask questions, just a reminder, if you can identify who you are, and then I would just ask that questions be questions with a question mark at the end, and maybe
No soliloquies?
Yeah, no soliloquies.
And we'll try to go reasonably quickly because I'm long-winded and get to as many as we can.
Hi, Jay Gleason. As President Obama bombed 7 different countries, more than Bush did, he also assassinated many people with his drones, which caused much collateral damage. So I'm kind of wondering whether Obama was concerned about putting foreign nationals in harm's way as much as he was putting American citizens in harm's way.
Well, first of all, his name is President Obama.
Ex-president.
Well, his name is still President Obama. I am just helping you with the pronunciation of it. Of course, he takes putting anyone in harm's way very seriously. Keeping America safe is not easy. And until you've been in that job and until you've been around people who are making those decisions, I understand it's hard to appreciate it. But keep in mind that every single day, whoever is the president should have one objective, and that's to keep America safe and do as little harm to others as possible. And that's what drove him every single day. But thank you for your question. I bet we can do better than that. Who else do we have here? Yes.
Hello. So I'm Andrew Swab. I'm an MPP 1 here at the Kennedy School. So my question was just the classic line in the early Obama years was, I don't want to leave my approval rating on a shelf. The whole reason we came to Washington was to do big things like the Affordable Care Act. Given that, I'm just wondering what your take would be about sort of the erosion of the Democratic Party in the past 8 years at the state and the Senate level and the congressional level, and whether the political movement that was started by President Obama can continue, if it's personality based or if it can rejuvenate itself once again.
Well, I think last night was an interesting marker. I mean, it was a terrific evening for Democrats, for progressives, and it was preceded by an enormous amount of energy and hard work that frankly had dissipated a little bit over the 8 years that President Obama was in office. And we spent a lot of time thinking about why that is, why people didn't appreciate that yes, we can meant yes, we can, not yes, I can, that this was never all about him. It was about a collective sense of responsibility to be citizens. And minimally, that means vote. 43% of the American people who were eligible to vote didn't vote in the last presidential election. That's a complete abdication of responsibility. And yes, he was a unique, charismatic figure who inspired a lot of us, but you can't just simply wait for that. You have to look at the realities of what's at stake. And I think part of what we've seen over the last 10 months with the rolling back of many of our very important policies that we thought protected our economy, strengthened the lives of working families, created an even playing field, elections have consequences. And I think we saw the march the day after the inauguration, the Women's March. We've seen the climate march. The scientists have come out. There's been a lot of energy in the streets, and that's important, but we can't just be against something. We have to be for something. And I think last night we really saw a concerted amount of hard work, the kind of work that got President Obama elected in the first place, at play all around our country. And what was heartening wasn't just the Democrats won, but the rich diversity of the people who won. And I think it was an example of what is still very possible. And so I guess I don't want to concede to your erosion of the party. I think what did happen as a result of some very strategic gerrymandering is that we lost a lot of our political capital. And thanks now to Eric Holder and the efforts he's doing on redistricting, we're going to try to gain some of that foothold back. But until every person votes and until we take care of voter suppression, which is another big challenge in our country, we're not really having the level playing field and the democracy that we should have. And we all have a responsibility to fight for it. And I have been heartened to see everywhere I travel. I've been spending a lot of time, I'm kind of have frenetic energy, so I spend a lot of time on the road. And everywhere I'm going, I'm meeting young people who want to run for office. I was in San Francisco last February, and I met a woman who said, I've been to 2 city council meetings. I have never been to a city council meeting in my life before. That's what gives me kind of optimism that we had kind of a shock to the system, and a lot of people didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming. And I think people are realizing, oh, we the people actually means I have to do something, and I can. And so I'm hoping that we build on the momentum that we saw last night. We take that into the midterms and then take it into the next election. But I also hasten to add, and President Obama, I think he tweeted this morning, it isn't just the president and the members of Congress. Who's on your school board is important. Your city council, your mayor, your state legislators. These are all important. They may not be sexy, and the figures who are running may not be the most inspirational and the most eloquent, but you look to what their values are. And if you believe that our democracy and the strength of our country comes from inclusion and big tent, and we're in this together, and it's not a zero-sum game. We should increase the size of the pie, not fight over the pie. If you believe every young child should get a fair shot, if you believe in those kind of progressive values, then you can't expect them to happen without working for them. Our democracy's always been messy. There hasn't been a single achievement that we've made in terms of bending that arc where there hasn't been an entrenched interest in the status quo. There's a lot of money tied up in the status quo. There's a lot of special interests tied up in that status quo. And to release that stranglehold requires really we the people. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic by nature, but I'm more optimistic today than I was a week ago, if that answers your question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Ryan Davis. I'm a junior at the college.
I know you.
Yeah, we met earlier. So the Obama campaign was founded on this idea of hope.
Hope and change.
And change, yes. And now that you've been in the White House, accomplished many things, and you've left, what are some of the major issues and hope for the country that you still have? What direction would you like to see our country go in? And what concerns do you have at the moment?
Well, I am still hopeful about our country, and I'm hopeful because of these people who I meet, just like Earl Smith, all over our country, who are fighting in their own local communities to try to be these forces for good. I'm hopeful because of the energy I see in audiences like this, and I've spent a lot of time on college campuses throughout the last 20 years, and you all still believe you can do anything, and that's terrific, and we want to breathe as much light into that as possible. I'm hopeful because of what the Obamas are going to do in the Obama Center, which is to help you. We want to create this platform for civic engagement where you can come and learn the tools to go out and change the world. If you want to learn how to run for office, if you want to start a local organization, if you want to be involved in campaigns, if you want to solve any of the major issues that we still have around our country or the world, our job is now to pass the baton to you, but make it easier for you than it was for us. And so all of that really gives me reason to be optimistic and hopeful. I'm concerned about kind of a toxicity in the climate that is relatively new at the surface. I think perhaps there was a sub rosa going on there for a while that I didn't see coming, but as a result of a lot of different factors, including the use of social media. I mean, I've always been worried about bullying. We had the first ever conference on bullying in the White House early on, and even then we started to say it is the social media piece of it that is so potentially damning because people aren't looking at each other. You say, I mean, I've had people say harsh things to me wherever I go, but usually the tone is a little bit better than it is through the invisible or the anonymity that you have over the internet. So how do we break that down, and how do we disagree without being disagreeable? How do we have room for ideas that are different than our own and recognize that you might actually learn something if you listen? What do we do about this sense that facts don't matter, science doesn't matter? I mean, it is just ludicrous to deny climate change. And some of the folks from the states who've been most dramatically affected by it are still not listening to the scientists who tell you, absolutely, this is happening. So I'm worried about all of that. But I come back to the reason for the optimism. And nobody ever said hope was easy, and certainly nobody ever said change was easy. But we can see it happening. And, you know, your time on this earth is precious. We talked about this a little bit when we were chatting earlier. And everybody has to figure out, well, how do you leave it better than you found it? And we might disagree about how to do that, but all of those ideas are important to flesh out. And one of the real advantages that you have being on a university campus of the caliber of this is that you get to just sit and talk to each other and learn. You don't know what a luxury that is. It's terrific. And so that gives me hope too. Your next generation, you're smarter, you're more informed, you're better educated. The world is smaller, and therefore you have the ability to find something in common with someone who's living in a town on the other side of the world. And we're all so connected. I just came back in the last month, I've been to Melbourne and Sydney, Australia. I've been to Calgary. I've been to San Francisco. And everybody knows everything that's going on. That's both good and bad. But it makes the world just incredibly efficient. But how you sort through the noise and find the facts and find the evidence and the discipline of the learning education that you receive at an institution like this, hold on to it when you leave here, because there are going to be those who try to strip it away from you, and don't let them.
Hi,
I'm going to be briefer. I really am. Yes, tell me who you are.
My name is Ted Amder. I'm a first-year graduate student in earth science. And I guess my question is on the theme of hope and where that hope comes from, because it seems like right now the energy you see on college campuses is oppositional. It's opposition against people tearing things down, rather than the hope that people were so excited about in 2008. And I'm wondering if we want to recapture that sense of hope and change that we had in 2008, does that come from a generational candidate and a person people can rally around, or does the Democratic Party, or whatever source, have to actually kind of change its platform to reflect what people might be hopeful about now in 2017?
You know where it really comes from? It comes from you. It comes from you deciding what do you want the culture of your campus to be, and you then go around this room and you find like-minded people and you start to talk to one another, and you start to create a culture where the toxicity and the kind of combativeness that's uncivil is not acceptable anymore. And I think part of my message to you all today is own your ability to be the change that we're talking about. Don't wait for some presidential candidate to come along and inspire you. You had a presidential candidate who won not once but twice, who I think you thought was inspirational. And if his definition of success would be if he instilled that in you. Not that you would be looking for the next person, the next Barack Obama. You be the next Barack Obama. And I think we'll vote for you. Won't we vote for him? If you earn our vote, you can make your campaign speech right here.
There's other questions you can. Yeah.
I'm so unbelievably serious about this. I think we underestimate what we can do. I mean, one of the issues that we worked on a lot in the White House that I was in the law school earlier talking about is sexual assault on college campuses. It's an epidemic. Yet I've seen across the landscape of our colleges and universities, school after school, saying, you know what? We don't want to have a culture where 1 in 5 women being sexually assaulted is acceptable. And everybody through this It's On Us initiative is trying to change that culture. And it's the same thing about democracy. It has to be all of us in there, talking to our neighbors, talking to our family members. I know that many families have political differences within the families. You can sit around the Thanksgiving table, and we've got to figure out a way to talk to one another. And I think that it's being made easy to not do that. And some of that is the way we consume information, and the fact that people who watch Fox probably don't watch MSNBC and vice versa. And there are a few of you in the room who are old enough to remember the name Walter Cronkite. Anybody remember? I know you remember Walter Cronkite. Okay, fine. So when Walter Cronkite told us something at 6 o'clock Central Time, we knew it to be true. Why? Because he said it once a day, he had credibility, he had a team of people who did research, and he delivered just facts. We see now a blending between news, editorial, and entertainment. And as those lines blur, where does the person who just wants the facts go? And because you are seeking information on demand, you can self-sort. And you're not in a position to always decide whether or not something is accurate or not. And so you're cast in that role. And I think the way to get around that is to just get more people in the room talking, agree on who are the experts, get their advice so that you're all operating on the same set of information. And those are the skills that you develop at college and university campuses. So take advantage of that muscle and use it here so that you can then go out and be mayor. Don't be president, be the mayor. Mayors have a lot of power and authority and ability to influence your daily life. So I encourage you all to consider, and if you don't run for office, help somebody who you believe in run for office. But vote. Even if you are not deeply inspired by the candidate, you still have to vote.
And I would add one thing, which is you asked about opposition. I mean, when I was a college senior, President Bush was president. And at that moment in time, I thought he was about the worst president that I'd see in my lifetime, and I was objectively wrong about that fact. But don't forget that he is what animated a lot of us early on, and sort of the energy that comes from opposition can flow to energy that's aspirational. He was the galvanizing force for an entire cohort of people that ended up fueling what was the aspirational Obama presidency. So I wouldn't, there's obviously a lot of energy around opposition to President Trump right now. It can flow to a more positive and affirmative place, and I'm hopeful that it will.
But you can make it do that. You can't just be against. You're right. President Bush helped mobilize, but that wasn't enough. You also have to be aspirational and believe in something.
Oh, me? Oh,
yes.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Stephanie Desange. I'm actually a dual degree, so an MPA at Harvard Kennedy School and an MBA at Wharton Business School. And I'll be graduating actually this May. And so I just wanted to know, as students who will now be entering the workforce, who are pretty disheartened given the current sentiment in America, which can be felt, the complete unease, there are those who are struggling with their place and their role in the current society. For instance, I morally could not apply to the Presidential Management Fellows Program, and I decided against it. What advice would you give us as we search for ways to create impact and work towards a mission based on our values, as we are in our current soul-searching phase on what we should consider doing closer to the end of our graduate school phase and enter the long phases of an entire career?
Great question. Great question. So I think it is really important to affiliate yourself with institutions that share your values. And if you don't think they share your values, you shouldn't work there. And you have choices. There are a lot of people who are minimum wage workers who do not have the flexibility to choose. They need a job and they've got mouths to feed. You all have choices. And so exercise your own agency. And if you don't feel comfortable working somewhere because you don't think that it reflects your values, don't. But also, we're social beings. You got to find your peeps. Like, Yohannes is my peep. If I'm having a bad day, I'm calling him. And you should surround yourself with people who have your best interest at heart, who nourish you, who help you feel whole, who you can trust and open up and let your hair down with. You need that circle to get through that long chapter called life, that long sequence of chapters called life. And I appreciate your anxiety. I share some of your anxiety, but I'm also old enough to remember when JFK was assassinated, and I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and Nixon resigned. I mean, I have these memories, and I've seen how resilient our democracy is, and it's resilient because of the American people. Our resilience is only as strong as the people, and so figure out it's always messy. Change is always messy, and we tried to prepare people for the fact that when someone comes in like President Obama and does want to upset the apple cart and does want to, be inclusive and give us something to hope for, that causes other people a lot of discomfort, and they're holding on to that status quo. It's worth fighting for, and it's worth being uncomfortable for. And there is no better time to be alive in America, whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether you're a person of color, than today. We have made enormous strides, and just talk to your grandparents and ask them, or your great-grandparents, because you're kind of young, or maybe your great. There are plenty of people in your family who could tell you how hard things were. I mean, John Lewis, I think he was tweeting day before yesterday about, I remember what it was like to get hit over the head to fight for the right to vote. So if you have to stand in the line in the rain, stand in the line in the rain. And I think we all have to find that strength within us. Do not let them beat you down.
I guess I just want to say that I'm actually from an immigrant family, and they're from Haiti. And so I think that I struggle a lot with where I fall currently within the society, especially given the sentiment towards immigrants.
You're here. You're here. You belong right where you are. And there are people around you who are learning from you and from your life experiences, and that's part of the richness of this university, is you have people from all over the world here. Yohannes' family are immigrants. And I learned a lot from him and having dinner with his mom and dad that I just didn't know. And I've had a lot of experiences living all over the world. And so I want you to feel cherished. And I know you feel vulnerable and scared, and there's enough turmoil to cause levels of anxiety, and you need a lot of people who are going to just invest in you and love you, and you're on a campus where you can find that. And so come up afterwards. I'm going to give you a hug. It's a good question, though, because there are a lot of people who are feeling very, very isolated and scared and worried about what might happen and to their world. And there needs to be more empathy to appreciate what they're going through.
Hi, my name's Spencer. I work in criminal justice reform. And
Yay!
I wanted to ask how President Obama dealt with all the vitriol and personal attacks since he started his political career, but especially, near the end and around his reelection.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think he's inspirational and he's visionary, but he's also very pragmatic. And he knew coming in that when you start to upset that apple cart, it's going to make people angry. What I think was a surprise to me and probably to him is just the lengths to which people would go through to try to stop him from moving forward on what were traditionally bipartisan objectives. So, for example, well, I'll come to criminal justice in a minute, but infrastructure. Infrastructure has always been something that Republicans and Democrats love to like. It was an investment. It was a way of making the United States more globally competitive. It's like ma and apple pie, and yet we couldn't get them to agree on investments in infrastructure. And so we're getting our clock cleaned in airports, for example, around the world, and ports, because people can choose where to ship their goods and services. So, but on criminal justice, we had 80 votes in the Senate. Now, for those of you who are not necessarily civics students, there are only 100, and we haven't had 80 votes on anything in as far back as I can remember. And there were 80 votes in the Senate ready to move forward with criminal justice at the federal level that would just simply have reduced nonviolent mandatory sentences on nonviolent drug offenders. A mouthful. Mandatory sentences that are currently imposed where judges have no discretion, lawyers have no discretion. You have to impose them regardless of the circumstances of the case. Why didn't it go forward? Politics. It was an election year, and Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, even though the Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House and the Republican chairman of the Judiciary in the Senate both wanted to move forward, he wouldn't call it up, which just shows you that our democracy sometimes is in the hands of people. You know, one person can screw up millions of lives, and that's frankly what Mitch McConnell did. But do you give up? No, I still go to meetings. I was meeting with the head of the Leadership Council, Vanita Gupta, yesterday, and I'm like, let's get it back on track. And you have Senator Kamala Harris and Rand Paul are doing a bail reform bill. So you just can't give up. And I think that's how he deals with it. It's like, yes, this is going to be really hard, and I'm going to just keep focusing on kind of true north, which is, where do I want to move the country? And if I can't do it through legislation, well, then I'll do it through executive orders. That's never optimal, and you see now why, because so many have been repealed or reversed. But you just do the very best you can. And you, no one should get into politics if they think it's about them. It's not about you. It's about the people who you serve. And if you start to think it's about you, you start to make decisions that are in your political interests and not in the interests of the people you serve. And then you should go away. And we made a conscious effort, and to the earlier question about, what's the point in having political capital if you don't use it? The reason why President Obama moved forward with the Affordable Care Act when he did is because he knew it would be contentious. 7 other presidents had tried to do it. He knew we needed a long runway, not just to get it passed, but to get it implemented and get it litigated twice to the Supreme Court and get people to appreciate it as part of their very life. And the reason why it's here today is because people said, don't take that away. And they showed up at town halls and they pressured their senators. So that's that. Be hopeful.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to pose a parting question to Valerie. The gentleman down there.
My name is Philip Lynch. I live up the road in Arlington. I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I love the Obama administration. And since this is inside the Obama years, I've got a couple of inside questions.
Yes.
Why didn't he fire Ed DeMarco?
Oh, Lord, today. That's keep going.
Okay.
It started out so well, and then it took a turn.
Why weren't more banks and financial institutions and their principals prosecuted after their abominable actions that led to the financial collapse? And why didn't Obama appoint Elizabeth Warren the head of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau? All
right, I'll go in reverse order. Elizabeth Warren couldn't generate the votes to get confirmed. And we were able to count the votes. The Consumer Financial Protection Agency would never have happened but for Elizabeth Warren. She created the idea. She pitched it to President Obama. He loved the idea. The whole point was to centralize in one agency all of the functions that dealt with consumers. And they were buried in agencies where it wasn't the top priority. And Elizabeth thought, and President Obama agreed, let's put them all together and let's make one agency. And he appointed her to be the interim director, and it was clear that she was never going to get confirmed. And then she decided to run for the Senate, and boy, are we glad that she's in the Senate today. So that was question number one. The reason why you shouldn't be directing your question about why we didn't prosecute the banks to me, you should direct that to either of our two attorney generals. Because in the Obama administration, we did not direct any investigations or any enforcement actions. That was left, and so that's why it's really important to select an attorney general who you have confidence in and who you recognize will be independent from the time they're confirmed on. And so there was never a single conversation in the Obama White House about individual prosecutions, but I encourage you to ask either Eric Holder or Loretta Lynch about why they did not prosecute. And I'm not going to discuss hiring and firing decisions in a public audience. That doesn't seem appropriate. But thank you for asking.
Thank you.
So as a sort of parting question, I think there's a lot of folks in the audience who are interested in potentially engaging in public service or having that be a part of their next step after they get out of Harvard.
Show of hands, just to make sure he's honest about that. Who's interested in running for office? Wow, that's terrific. I saw you earlier. You're okay. Who's interested in serving in the federal government? Who's interested in state or local government? Love this school. You all are great. That's terrific. Okay.
So
I was just testing your theory, your hypothesis.
I had a few hands in the audience. What would be the best advice that you could offer them? And then before you answer that, I'm going to give my version of it because I learned a lot of it from you. The single best piece of advice that I got from Valerie, and I've gotten a lot of it, and it seems so much more relevant given the moment of time that we're in right now, is there is no end that is worth sacrificing your personal integrity for. And there is no political outcome that is worth playing in the gray for ethically. And it meant a lot to me then, and it's, that advice juxtaposed with this current moment in time and what we're seeing in Washington means even more. So I don't know if that's top on your list, but I'd love to hear what advice you'd give to the folks in the audience.
Look, if you are a public servant, truly a public servant, that means you represent other people. And you surely better represent them well, and you better have a strong moral compass. And there'll be lots of people who try to tempt you and pull you off course. I remember when I was really young, I would call my parents for ethical consultations, I'd called it. And my mother would always get on the phone first, and we'd be debating some issue, and my father would get on the telephone and, what are you debating? And we'd tell him, and he'd say, if you're having a debate, you know the answer. Don't do it. It's just that simple. If you're well within the lines, then you never have to worry about going over the edge. And that's President Obama's moral compass. And he made a lot of tough decisions, as you heard from some of the questions here. He did the best he could. He did what he thought was right. He thought it through. He did as much analysis as possible, and then he did what he thought was right. To be a public servant, you hold the public's trust. That's really important, to hold their trust. And you have to earn it every day. You can't just earn it and then get elected and then say, okay, well, I can now go do whatever I want to do because I've got their trust. And I think unless you're prepared to start each day all over again and work hard and keep the people who are counting on you front and center, then don't do it. But if you do feel that you can do that, there is no higher calling. And I've spent I was counting up the years the other day, half of my life in the private sector and half of my life in the public sector. And I've had terrific jobs in the private sector, but my absolute worst day in the public sector, and we've had a few really bad days, I wouldn't have traded them for my absolute best days in the private sector. But I'm also really glad that I practiced law for 6 years at a law firm, even though I often reflect on it as, like the worst 6 years of my professional life. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot of skills that helped me then when I became a lawyer for the city of Chicago. And the skills that I learned in the city of Chicago helped me as a real estate developer and the boards that I've served on. So each chapter of your life, you're trying to build on skills that will help you with the next chapter. And I think you also have to keep an open mind. I mean, the biggest example I can give you is that when I worked for the city of Chicago, the enemy was the federal government. We couldn't stand the federal government. And I said over and over again, I will never work for the federal government, ever. They don't get it. They're so far removed. And I felt like working in the city, my neighbors were the people I was serving. I couldn't get away from them if I tried. And I liked that sense of going to a community meeting and seeing a neighborhood revitalize and know that we were the instrument to help fulfill the dreams of the people we were there to serve. And I was afraid I would feel aloof from that if I worked at the federal government. And the reason I went, back to your first question, to work for President Obama is that I knew he got that. He understood what public service was all about. And if you do it, and you do it well, your children will be proud of you. And even if none of you have kids right now, one day many of you will. And if your kids aren't proud of you, your parents will be proud of you. Someone in your life that you love will appreciate your service. And if they don't, you will appreciate it. And at the end of the day, you just want to know that your life was well spent and that you made the biggest contribution you could. And maybe your contribution is tutoring a group of high school children who without you wouldn't go to college. That's wonderful public service too. So you get to define it, and it doesn't have to be a full-time job. It can just be a couple hours a week. But it's a part, again, of your responsibility as citizens. And you make me hopeful, so keep making me hopeful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.